My breath caught in my throat as I sank deeper into the steaming water, the heat curling around my weary limbs like a lover's whispered promise. The bathroom was my sanctuary, a fleeting escape from the endless days of tending to my sister's house, her son, her life. But that night, the air felt heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth seep into my bones. When the door creaked open, my heart lurched. "James?" I called softly, my voice trembling in the dim light. No answer came, only the soft shuffle of bare feet against the tiles. And then he was there, my nephew, his silhouette looming in the steam, his eyes dark and unreadable, like pools of shadowed ink. I should have screamed, should have demanded he leave. But his gaze held me captive, a strange, simmering intensity that made my pulse race in ways I didn't want to understand. He knelt beside the tub, his breath warm against my cheek, and whispered, "Aunt Clara, you're so beautiful." His voice was low, almost reverent, but there was a hunger beneath it, a raw edge that sent a shiver down my spine. My hands gripped the edges of the tub, water sloshing softly as his fingers brushed my shoulder, tentative at first, then bolder, tracing the curve of my collarbone. The touch was a spark, igniting something long buried within me. A need, a yearning for someone to see me, to want me. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me, tilting my head toward his, or maybe it was him, his lips finding mine with a desperate, searching heat. The kiss was a collision, soft and searing, a tangle of breath and forbidden longing. His hands slid beneath the water, finding my waist, pulling me closer until I was half out of the tub, my skin pressed against the rough cotton of his shirt. The world narrowed to the rhythm of our breaths, the slide of his palms against my back, the way my body arched toward him as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. It was wrong, so terribly, achingly wrong, but the fire in my veins drowned out the whispers of guilt. For the first time in years, I felt alive, desired, whole. We stumbled from the bathroom, a clumsy dance of limbs and whispered apologies, until we reached my bedroom. The door clicked shut, and with it, the last of my restraint. His hands were everywhere, mapping the contours of my body with a reverence that made my heart ache. I clung to him, my fingers threading through his dark hair as our bodies found a rhythm, a slow, burning cadence that spoke of need and surrender. His skin was warm against mine, his breath a ragged hymn against my throat. And I lost myself in the sensation, the way our bodies melded, the soft gasps that filled the air, the pulse of something deeper than lust. It wasn't just his touch, it was the way he looked at me, as if I were the only thing that mattered, as if I were young again, unburdened by years of loneliness. But even as I gave myself to him, a shadow lingered at the edge of my mind. This was James, my sister's son, the boy I'd watched grow up, the one who called me Aunt Clara with a shy smile. The weight of that truth pressed against my chest, a cold stone amidst the heat. I pushed it away, focusing on the curve of his shoulder beneath my lips, the way his hands trembled as they held me. I told myself it was just this once, a fleeting lapse, a moment of weakness that would never happen again. But deep down, I knew I was lying. The hunger in me had been awakened, and it was ravenous. Afterward, we lay in silence, the air thick with the scent of sweat and regret. His arm draped across my waist, heavy and possessive, but his eyes were distant, staring at the ceiling as if he too felt the weight of what we'd done. I wanted to speak, to say something that would make it less real, less damning, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I traced the line of his jaw with my fingertip, memorizing the shape of him, knowing this moment would haunt me. "Clara," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "What are we doing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Only that I didn't want it to stop. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and careful distance. I threw myself into chores, scrubbing floors until my hands were raw, as if I could cleanse the sin from my soul. But every night, the memory of his touch returned, vivid and unrelenting. I'd lie awake, my body aching for him, my mind screaming at me to stop. I was 42, a woman who'd long since given up on love, living in the shadow of my sister's perfect life. James was 20, vibrant and reckless, with a future that didn't belong in my arms. Yet the thought of him, of his breath against my skin, his whispered words, made my heart race with a longing I couldn't suppress. It was a week later when he came to me again. The house was quiet, my sister asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm brewing below. He found me in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I poured tea, and without a word, he pulled me into his arms. The kiss was hungrier this time, laced with a desperation that mirrored my own. We didn't make it to the bedroom. The counter dug into my back as he pressed himself against me, his hands lifting me with an urgency that stole my breath. It was frantic, consuming, a clash of bodies and emotions that left me gasping. Every touch was a confession, every sigh a plea for forgiveness we both knew we didn't deserve. I began to notice the changes in myself. The mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. Flushed cheeks, eyes bright with a reckless spark. I felt younger, bolder, as if his touch had peeled away the years of neglect. But with that came the shame, a gnawing ache that grew with every stolen moment. I'd catch myself watching him across the dinner table, my heart twisting at the sight of his smile, knowing I was betraying my sister, my family, myself. Yet when he slipped into my room at night, his hands finding mine in the dark, I let him in. I let him unravel me, piece by piece, until I was nothing but need and guilt intertwined. The nights became our secret kingdom, a realm where guilt was silenced by the press of skin against skin. James would slip into my room when the house was still, his footsteps soft but deliberate, each one a promise of what was to come. I'd wait for him, my heart pounding, my body already alive with anticipation. The door would close, and the world outside would cease to exist. There was only him, his hands, his breath, the way his eyes held mine as if I were the center of his universe. Each encounter was bolder, hungrier, as if we were racing against the inevitable moment when this would all come crashing down. One night, he found me in the laundry room, the hum of the washing machine a dull roar in the background. I was folding sheets, my hands moving mechanically, when his arms circled my waist from behind. His lips brushed the nape of my neck, a soft, searing touch that sent a tremor through me. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with need. "I can't stop thinking about you." I turned in his embrace, my resolve crumbling under the weight of his gaze. The air was heavy with the scent of detergent and desire, and before I could speak, his mouth was on mine, urgent and consuming. We stumbled against the machine, its vibrations echoing the rhythm of our bodies as we gave in once more. His hands slid beneath my blouse, tracing the curve of my spine, and I arched into him, my breath catching at the fire his touch ignited. It was reckless, dangerous, but the thrill of it, the knowledge that we could be caught, only sharpened the edge of my longing. The encounters grew more daring. A stolen moment in the garage where the cool concrete pressed against my back as he lifted me onto the workbench, his hands gripping my thighs with a possessive intensity. Another in the attic, surrounded by dust and forgotten relics, where our whispers mingled with the creak of old floorboards. Each time, I told myself it would be the last, that I'd find the strength to end this before it destroyed us both. But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. His touch was a balm to the loneliness that had carved itself into my soul, a reminder that I was more than the spinster aunt living in her sister's shadow. With him, I was Clara, desired, vibrant, alive. Yet the guilt was never far behind. It clung to me like damp cloth, heavy and suffocating. I'd see my sister Emily laughing with James at breakfast, her hand ruffling his hair with maternal affection, and my stomach would twist. She trusted me, her older sister, to care for her home, her son, and here I was, betraying her in the worst way imaginable. I began to avoid her eyes, afraid she'd see the truth written in mine. At night, I'd lie awake after James left, my body still humming from his touch, my mind replaying every moment of our sin. I'd pray for forgiveness, for strength, but the prayers felt hollow, drowned out by the memory of his lips against my throat, his hands pulling me closer. Then there was Mr. Harrow, the widower next door, whose presence added another layer to my tangled web. Daniel Harrow was in his late 50s, with a quiet charm and eyes that seemed to see too much. He'd taken to stopping by with small offerings, a basket of apples from his tree, a book he thought I'd like. His visits were innocent at first, a neighbourly kindness. But I began to notice the way his gaze lingered, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch sharing tea, his hand brushed mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through me. I pulled away, my cheeks burning, but the seed had been planted. I was starving for connection, and Daniel's attention was a temptation I hadn't expected. It was after one of James's visits, my body still flushed from our latest indiscretion, that I found myself alone with Daniel in his garden. He'd invited me over to see his roses, and I'd gone, desperate for a distraction from the chaos in my heart. The air was thick with the scent of blooms, and as we stood among the flowers, he reached out, his fingers grazing my cheek. "You seem different lately, Clara," he said, his voice low, "like you're carrying a secret." I froze, my pulse racing. But before I could respond, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine. The kiss was gentle, tentative, so different from James's desperate hunger, and for a moment, I let myself sink into it. But the guilt was immediate, a sharp blade cutting through the haze. I pulled back, stammering an excuse, and fled back to the house, my heart pounding with shame. That night, James came to me again, and I was more reckless than ever, as if I could erase Daniel's kiss with the intensity of our connection. We moved together in the dark, our bodies a symphony of need and surrender, each touch a defiance of the world that would judge us. His hands were fire against my skin, his breath a ragged prayer, and I lost myself in the rhythm of our union, the way our bodies spoke what our words could not. But even as I clung to him, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down. I was spiraling, caught between two men, two sins, each one feeding the other in a cycle I couldn't break. The days blurred into a haze of secrecy and desire. I began to live for the moments with James, the stolen hours where I could forget who I was and what I'd done. But the cost was steep. I saw it in the mirror, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, lips that trembled with unspoken truths. I saw it in James, too, the way his smiles grew rarer, his touches more desperate, as if he too felt the noose tightening around us. We were bound by our sin, tethered to a path that could only lead to ruin. And yet, I couldn't let go. The part of me that craved love, that needed to be seen, was stronger than the part that knew better. The weight of my choices grew heavier with each passing day, a chain forged from guilt and desire that bound me tighter than any lover's embrace. I moved through the house like a ghost, my smiles forced, my hands trembling as I poured coffee or folded laundry. Every creak of the floorboards made me flinch, certain that Emily had seen the truth in my eyes, that she knew the betrayal I carried like a second skin. James, too, seemed haunted, his once easy laughter replaced by a quiet intensity that mirrored my own. We were conspirators in our own downfall, tethered by a secret that burned brighter with every touch, every whispered confession in the dark. Our encounters had become a ritual, a sacred and profane dance that consumed us both. One night, as rain lashed against the windows, he came to me in the guest room, his hair damp and his eyes wild with need. The storm outside echoed the one within me, a tempest of longing and shame that threatened to tear me apart. He pulled me to him, his hands framing my face, and kissed me with a ferocity that stole my breath. We sank to the floor, the carpet rough against my back, and our bodies moved in a rhythm as old as time, a slow, searing cadence that spoke of hunger and surrender. His lips traced the curve of my neck, his breath hot and ragged, and I arched into him, my fingers digging into his shoulders as if I could anchor myself against the tide of my own weakness. Each touch was a spark, each sigh a plea, and in those moments I was no longer Clara, the dutiful aunt, but a woman reborn in the fire of his desire. Afterward, we sat in silence, the air heavy with the weight of what we'd done. James's hand rested on mine, his thumb tracing slow circles, but his eyes were distant, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach. "Clara," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper, "we can't keep doing this." The words were a blade, cutting through the fragile illusion we'd built. I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but the truth was undeniable. We were destroying each other, piece by piece, and no amount of passion could justify the cost. I nodded, my throat tight, and let him go, watching as he slipped out into the dusk, his silhouette fading like a dream I could no longer hold. The days that followed were a purgatory of my own making. I moved through the house with mechanical precision, cooking meals, folding laundry, all while a storm raged within me. Emily's laughter, once a comfort, now felt like an accusation. I avoided James's gaze, terrified of the longing I'd see there, terrified of my own weakness. And Daniel, his visits continued, his kindness a quiet torture. I wanted to confess to him, to lay bare my sins and beg for forgiveness, but the words stayed locked inside me. Instead, I smiled and nodded, my heart fracturing with every lie. I began to write, late at night, when the house was silent, pouring my story onto the page. It was a confession, a plea, a warning to anyone who might listen. I wrote of the loneliness that had driven me to this place, the ache of being unseen, unloved, forgotten. I wrote of James, his touch a flame that had warmed me even as it burned. I wrote of Daniel, whose gentle smiles had offered a glimpse of redemption I didn't deserve. And I wrote of myself, a woman who had lost her way, who had traded morality for a fleeting taste of life. The words were my penance, each one a step toward the forgiveness I wasn't sure I could find. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, my notebook open before me, Emily found me. Her eyes were soft with concern, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Clara, you've been so distant," she said, her voice gentle. What's wrong? The question was a knife, and for a moment I thought I'd break, spilling everything in a flood of tears and truth. But I couldn't. Not to her. Not after all I'd done. Instead, I forced a smile, my voice trembling as I said, "Just tired, Em. It's been a long few months." She hugged me, her warmth a reminder of the sister I'd betrayed, and I held her tightly, praying she'd never know. I knew I had to end it, all of it. With James, with Daniel, with the version of myself I'd become. The decision was a weight lifted and a wound inflicted, a necessary pain. I sought James out one last time, finding him in the garage, his hands busy with a toolbox. The air between us crackled, heavy with unspoken truths. "We're done," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. His eyes met mine, dark with sorrow, but he nodded, understanding what I couldn't say. "I'm sorry, Clara," he whispered, and I turned away before I could change my mind, my heart breaking with every step. Daniel was harder. I went to his house, my hands trembling as I knocked. He welcomed me with a smile, but it faltered when he saw my face. "I can't do this," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "I'm not who you think I am." He reached for me, his touch gentle, but I stepped back, shaking my head. "You deserve better, Daniel. I'm sorry." I left him standing there, his confusion a mirror to my own, and walked home in the twilight, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. Now, as I sit here, my pen trembling in my hand, I write these words as a final act of contrition. I am Clara, a woman who loved too fiercely, who sought solace in the wrong places, who betrayed those she held dear. I tell this story not to justify my actions, but to warn of the dangers of loneliness, of the void that can swallow you whole if you let it. I am still searching for forgiveness, for a way to make peace with the woman I've become. Perhaps I'll find it in these pages, in the truth I've laid bare. Perhaps I'll find it in the quiet moments, when I learn to love myself without needing another's touch. I don't know what comes next. Emily and James are still here, their lives intertwined with mine, and I must face them every day, knowing what I've done. But I will try to be better, to rebuild the parts of me I've broken. And to anyone who reads this, I offer this plea. Guard your heart against the emptiness. Seek love in the light, not the shadows. For once you step into the dark, it's a long, painful road back.